Hi, everybody. Billy Obenauer here. In this lesson, we're going to continue our discussion on Bateman and Konopowski's management textbook, moving forward to look at Chapter 10, focusing on leadership. All right, so let's get started. Now, as we move through this lesson, we're going to talk about our vision as leaders. We're going to discuss similarities and differences between leading and managing, talk a little bit about sources of power in organizations. We're going to talk about some of the traditional approaches to understanding leadership, a little bit about the contemporary approaches to understanding leadership. And then finally, we'll talk about some different types of opportunities to be a leader. As leaders, there are a few key behaviors that we need to engage in order to be successful. The first of those behaviors is to challenge the process or innovate. We can't get caught up in how things have always been done. We need to critically evaluate whether or not our current processes and procedures are positioning us for success. We also need to inspire a shared vision, and we're going to talk about that a little bit on the next few slides. Next, we need to enable others to act by empowering them. Our employees need to have the authority to make decisions that are relevant to their jobs. For example, as a manager, I couldn't expect my employees to provide the level of service that I expected if I didn't provide them with the autonomy to give customers refunds or discounts when they had issues. We also need to provide people with the resources that they need. I often talk to researchers whose organizations don't provide them with data or funds to collect data. Now, how is a researcher supposed to be productive without the resources necessary to access data? Their leaders need to address this. We need to model the way. And this is one of the most difficult behaviors because whatever we model, our employees will emulate, but not quite at the same level. This means that we must always do our best in front of our people, but we can't get caught up in doing their jobs. For example, as a manager, I had to balance modeling the types of customer interactions I expected my employees to engage in with making sure that I was engaging in the management tasks that were required of me. All right, finally, we need to motivate or encourage the heart. One of the most important processes that we need to engage in as leaders is developing a vision. A vision is a mental image of where we see our organization in the future. It's going to be influenced by your goals and values as a leader. A vision is important because we can't prepare our employees for every scenario that they will see in the workplace. We can, however, share our vision with them so that they can use our vision for the organization to guide them through uncertain situations. Often, leaders fail to provide a vision and focus on just getting through the day. This prevents them from truly achieving their potential. Even if you do have a vision, sometimes it's not going to be effective. When visions fail, it's often because instead of serving to meet the organization's needs, they may be more focused on the leader's needs and fail to meet the needs of followers. Additionally, leaders need to recognize that visions may have to change from time to time. For example, technological changes, a recession, or the COVID-19 pandemic are all examples of environmental factors that can cause leaders to change their vision. Now, we often talk about managers when we talk about leadership, but not all managers are necessarily leaders. Some managers focus on process issues or what I call mechanical issues instead of people. While performing mechanistic management functions is certainly important, it's not necessarily leadership. Because managers oversee other employees, however, management positions create leadership opportunities. As discussed on the previous slide, managers deal with a lot of the mechanical issues associated with running an organization, such as scheduling, planning, budgeting, and structuring the organization. Leadership, however, focuses on personal issues, such as orchestrating change, setting direction for the organization, and inspiring people. Sometimes, rather than comparing managers and leaders, it's a bit more effective to compare different types of leadership. Supervisory leadership deals with providing guidance and support regarding day to day operations. This is the type of work that we often see middle managers and frontline managers doing. Strategic leadership, however, focuses on purpose and giving meaning to organizations. This is critical for top level managers. Frontline and middle level managers can also engage in elements of strategic leadership, though their opportunities to do so may be somewhat limited. Now that we've talked a little bit about what a leader is, let's think a little bit about what good leaders need in order to be effective. While there is some truth to the statement that good leaders need good followers, because after all, if people don't follow, leaders can't be effective, that might be an overly simplistic statement that absolves leaders of responsibility. If you think about the aspects of followership that we say are important, is it not the job of leaders to inspire enthusiasm? Aren't leaders responsible for providing training opportunities that help employees master skills? Shouldn't leaders influence the standards that employees hold themselves to? Yes, we do need good followers, but leaders also influence how followers develop. Now, leaders can have power that emerges from a variety of sources. The first of these sources is legitimacy. Now, legitimate power is a power that exists because of a person's formal position within the organization. Next, we have reward power, and this comes from a leader's ability to provide employees with positive consequences in response to their behavior. Now, coercive power is essentially the opposite of reward power. Right? Coercive power emerges when somebody has the ability to punish or provide a negative consequence in response to behavior. Referent power is power that comes from our desire to identify with a person. This desire comes from positive traits of the individual. Now, finally, expert power comes from a person's knowledge or expertise in an area. For example, if a human resource manager tells us that we need to change our hiring process so we don't get sued, even if the human resource manager doesn't have authority over our processes, we're going to follow their guidance because we trust their expertise and they have expert power. On the next few slides, we're going to discuss traditional approaches to understanding leadership. All right, specifically, we're going to talk about trait approaches, behavioral approaches, and situational approaches. The trait theories of leadership say that good leaders share traits. While there aren't necessarily specific traits that are required for good leadership, there are some trends that have been identified. Effective leaders tend to have strong levels of drive. They tend to have good motivation, tend to be high on integrity. They also tend to have self confidence and knowledge of the business. According to trait theories of leadership, three personality traits from the big five are important to leadership. Extroversion, or a person's propensity to be outgoing and engage in social interactions, has a positive relationship with leadership emergence, even though it's not necessarily related to leadership effectiveness. The reason that extroversion is related to emergence is that extroverted leaders are able to build relationships and position themselves well to be selected for leadership positions. In terms of leadership effectiveness, conscientiousness and openness to experience are positively associated with leadership effectiveness. There are also a set of traits known as the dark triad. And within the dark triad, there are narcissism, which is associated with an inflated sense of self, psychopathy, which is associated with a lack of concern for others, and Machiavellianism, which is associated with manipulative behavior. To a certain extent, each of these traits has been associated with leadership emergence. Additionally, research has shown that moderate levels of these traits have been associated with leadership effectiveness, but high and low scores are generally associated with lower levels of leadership effectiveness. Now, why would it be that people who are in the mid range here and have moderate scores of
Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism are more effective leaders than people who are either low on these traits or high on these traits. Well, let's think through this and let's use psychopathy as an example here. So if I am high on psychopathy, I don't really have much concern for others. I'm not going to have much care for my people. Okay, so if I'm over here on psychopathy, I'm not going to be paying much attention to my people's needs. And as a result of that, I'm probably going to have some issues getting people to follow me and getting people to buy into my leadership. Now, on the other end over here, if I'm very low on psychopathy, I might be in a position where I am putting people's needs above everything else. I'm prioritizing people's needs at all times. But as a result of that, I'm prioritizing all sorts of different personal needs over the needs of the business. All right. So that's going to take away from my effectiveness as well. And that's why, if I'm more somewhere here in the middle where I care about people's needs, but I'm also able to contextualize those needs and balance them with the needs of the business, I'm probably going to be a more effective leader. While there are a variety of traits that different scholars have associated with leadership effectiveness, one trait that many scholars agree is important to leadership effectiveness is the ability to perceive the needs and goals of others and adjust your leadership approach accordingly. Unlike trait theories of leadership, behavioral theories of leadership imply that we can train leaders because leadership effectiveness is the result of specific behaviors. Early studies on behavioral theories found two key types of leadership. The first, initiating structure, involves actions such as assigning tasks, clarifying roles, setting standards, and providing deadlines. The second, consideration, involves behaviors focused on trust, respect, and caring. Behaviors associated with initiating structure are sometimes referred to as task performance behaviors because they're initiated with a focus on reaching goals. Behaviors that are related to consideration are sometimes called group maintenance behaviors because they're focused on maintaining relationships within the group. Leader member exchange theory, or LMX, emphasizes that a leader's relationships with individuals also play an important role in leadership effectiveness. One of the key contributions of leader member exchange theory is that we often see the formation of in groups and out groups in organizations. Leaders then interact differently with members of in groups and out groups, which results in different outcomes for members of the different groups. As leaders, we need to work to reduce the likelihood of the formation of these outgroups so that we can improve our performance as leaders and the performance of our followers. Another leadership behavior that is important to consider is how leaders involve others in decision making. In autocratic leadership, leaders don't consider the input of others. Instead, they simply make decisions and announce them. For example, as an autocratic leader, if I have a problem with production efficiency, I might decide to implement an incentive pay system and simply announce that to my employees. In democratic leadership, leaders solicit information from employees that informs their decision making. In our production example, a leader might ask employees what they think they can do to improve production. Employees might suggest things like repairing equipment, hiring more help, and reorganizing the warehouse. Based upon this feedback, the leader will then make a decision. Right? Laissez faire leaders absolve themselves of responsibility and avoid decision making. Going back to our example, a laissez faire leader might ignore the production issue and hope employees figure it out. The final component to behavioral leadership that we'll discuss here is the Blake and Mountains leadership grid, which rates managers on performance oriented behavior and maintenance oriented behavior. The challenge with this grid is that it treats leadership as having a single best approach, such as a score of 9-9. All right, this is a bit problematic because not all followers require involved leadership. For example, People who work in fairly autonomous roles may not need a leader who's high on concern for people. Instead, they may prefer that a leader stays out of their way, so to speak, as opposed to having a leader who's attempting to facilitate relationships. So while there is some value to this grid, we have to remember that different situations might require different types of leadership. And that brings us to situational approaches to leadership. Situational approaches to leadership argue that there are not ideal traits or behaviors related to leadership. Instead, ideal leadership is based upon the situation. What is right for any given situation is going to depend on the abilities of the manager, the characteristics of the subordinate, and other factors related to the situation. Vroom created a participative model for situational leadership. There are two different versions, a time based model and a development based model. What you see on the screen here is a development based model. According to Vroom's model, we ask 7 different questions. Those questions are related to decision significance, importance of commitment, leader's expertise, likelihood of commitment, group support for objectives, group expertise, and team competence. Our responses to these questions determine the path that we follow. For example, we start with asking about decision significance, or how important the decision is to the success of the organization. And you can see that here on the leftmost column in our model. Okay. Now, if the answer is low or not very important, we look at the bottom 2 paths on the model here. If the answer is high or very important, however, we look at the top paths, or those above the red line that I'm drawing is on your screen. Okay, once we're done with that question, we move on to importance of commitment, which is the next column in the model. Then we move on to the next column, and so on and so forth. As we follow the pathways in Vroom's model, there are 5 potential decisions. On the left, we see the decision for the leader to decide. This decision gives the greatest amount of influence to the leader. Okay, but as we move to the right on this model, each outcome gives more and more freedom to the group itself. Okay, until we reach the point that the decision is entirely delegated to the group. Fiedler developed a model related to the situational approach. Fiedler stated that effective group performance was dependent on the match between a leader's style and the situation. To identify leadership style, Fiedler used a least preferred coworker scale. Leaders who indicated that they did not like many coworkers were considered task oriented, and those who indicated that they liked coworkers were considered relationship oriented. Then the situation was assessed in terms of leader member relations, which focused on things like trust for the leader, task structure, and the leader's position power. Now, this chart here is designed to help us understand Fiedler's contingency model a little more clearly. According to Fiedler's contingency model, leader member relations are the most important component to the situation. So, good leader member relations are going to lead to more favorable situations, and poor leader member relations are going to lead to less favorable situations. Structure is the next most important component to the situation. So, when we have good leader member relations, and structured tasks, we're going to have our most favorable situations. When we have poor leader member relations and unstructured tasks, we're going to have our least favorable situations. All right. So once we've identified that, then we're going to go out and fill out the rest of the blocks accordingly. Position power is the least important. So we fill that out last. Now, when we have good leader member relations, structured tasks, and high leader position power, we're going to have our most favorable situations. When we have poor leader member relations, unstructured task structure, and low leader position power, we're going to have our least favorable situations. Once we identify that, we go through and we fill out the rest of the row. Now, this leaves us with 8 different situations, as you'll notice down here. Okay. Now, Fiedler said task motivated leaders are best for situation 8 because situation 8 is a little bit of a disaster and the employees need guidance. He also said that task oriented leaders are preferred for situations 1 through 3. Now, the reason that they're preferred for situations 1 through 3 is that these situations are favorable and employees really just need some clarity on the work being done from time to time. Now, relationship oriented leaders are a little more favorable for situations 4 through 7. Okay, these situations here in the middle. And the reason is that these situations have a little more ambiguity, and being able to connect with employees and help them through uncertainties is critical in these situations. Since, according to Fiedler, we can't change the leader's style without changing the leader, to move to a more favorable situation or a match between leadership style and situation, we should focus on elements of the situation that we can change. For example, if we're in situation 4 and we have a task oriented leader, all right, then increasing position power is going to provide us with a more favorable situation and create a much better match between leadership and the situation. Hershey and Blanchard's situational theory states that employees grow in both their job maturity and their psychological maturity. As employee maturity grows, the leadership behaviors required change. Employees who are low in maturity benefit from task oriented leadership because they need more clarity about the actual work that they're doing in their jobs. As maturity increases, maintenance oriented leadership becomes more important. Employees with the highest levels of maturity, however, require neither task oriented nor maintenance oriented leadership because they're capable of meeting their own needs. Path goal theory of leadership states that a combination of follower characteristics and environmental factors help to determine the most appropriate leadership behaviors. When the appropriate leadership behaviors are used, job satisfaction and performance will be at their highest. Path goal theory actually builds on the Ohio State studies that we discussed earlier. You can conceptualize path goal theory's directive leadership as task oriented leadership. According to path goal theory, this type of leadership is most effective when tasks are ambiguous and require clarification. You can conceptualize supportive leadership as relationship oriented leadership. According to path goal theory, this type of leadership will be most effective when tasks are structured, thus don't require clarity, and managing of relationships becomes more important. Sometimes there are substitutes for leadership in the workplace. For example, employee experience and knowledge may reduce the need for task oriented leadership. For managers, finding ways to incorporate substitutes for leadership may increase your efficiency as a leader. Followers can also create substitutes for leadership. For example, when managers are not providing relationship oriented leadership, followers can work to develop relationships with their peers. This may help to improve job satisfaction. Next, we're going to talk about some more contemporary theories of leadership: charismatic leadership, transformational leadership, and transactional leadership. Charismatic leaders create a vision that inspires others. Their leadership is often grounded in what they believe are moral principles. They're able to inspire energy in their followers. While we often think of great people like Martin Luther King Jr. as charismatic leaders, it's important to remember that not all charismatic leaders use this skill in a positive manner. In fact, some historians have associated Adolf Hitler with charismatic leadership. Transformational leaders inspire organizational support in such a way that people often put the needs of the organization ahead of their own personal needs. When I think of transformational leaders, I often think of Mike Walsh, my former boss at the New York State Technology Enterprise Corporation. At one point in time, Mike asked me to attend a function in Saratoga, New York on a Thursday night. I had to give a presentation in New Haven, Connecticut the next morning. The presentation was kind of a big deal to me. I wasn't really going to benefit from going to the event in Saratoga, but the organization would benefit from me being there. So I went to the event in Saratoga and I put the needs of the organization ahead of my own needs. That night, as I was driving to Connecticut, I realized what had happened and I thought about how Mike inspired me to contribute to the organization. At that point, I realized that he was an excellent example of a transformational leader. Transformational leadership is a little bit different from transactional leadership. Transactional leadership focuses on exchanges. In other words, leaders attempt to motivate employees in exchange for something they desire, such as a promotion. Many of the best leaders can engage in both transformational and transactional leadership at the same time. Those who can do this very well may achieve level 5 leadership status. Level 5 leaders have strong will and humility and can help to facilitate long term organizational success. We're going to wrap up this lesson by briefly touching on a few more leadership styles. Authentic leaders are true to their own beliefs. They're known for honesty and integrity. They also tend to be ethically mature. Pseudo transformational leaders, on the other hand, talk about positive change and sometimes portray themselves as transformational leaders, but they're really looking out for their own self interest as opposed to follower needs or the needs of the organization. Servant leaders work to benefit the organization by meeting the needs of its members. They often prioritize the needs of their employees. Bridge leaders leave their cultures for a period of time and then return to lead. Upon returning, they're able to use their understanding of different cultures and values to bridge gaps within the organization. Shared leadership is a system where leadership rotates based upon the expertise of members of a team. In other words, one person might lead one aspect of a project while another person leads a different aspect. Shared leadership units still have a designated leader, but that person delegates leadership responsibilities for different tasks based upon expertise. Shared leadership is most effective when tasks are interdependent. Finally, lateral leadership exists when people at the same level of the organization collaborate to solve problems. As a final thought for this lesson, leaders need to lead with courage. They need to be able to face issues, speak honestly, and make tough decisions. Leading with courage means facing criticism and resistance head on. Billy Obenauer here saying thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you soon.